The origin story of the rich and powerful wrestling mogul, Vincent McMahon Jr., begins in a poor, run-down North Carolina trailer park where a tough, mouthy, dyslexic kid named Vinnie Lupton is living with his mom.
There was some kind of a falling out in the marriage, and then he and his brother Rod were left to be raised by their mother Vicky. He kind of had a chip on his shoulder from the beginning.
All most people know from this period of Vince's life comes from his 2001 interview with Playboy magazine.
He alludes to his mother sexually assaulting him. He alludes to being molested when he was 6 by other teenage kids.
There's stories of his mother bringing various different men into their lives. There was, in particular, Leo Lupton, who was officially Vince's stepfather. He apparently was a very abusive man.
And despite that abuse, or perhaps because of it, Vince develops a ruthlessness that will come to define him.
Vince said that he was upset that Leo Lupton died before he had a chance to kill him, and that he would have really enjoyed being able to do that.
At 12, Vince finally meets his biological father, who happens to be one of wrestling's most successful promoters, Vincent James McMahon, or Vince Sr.
Vincent James McMahon was the most important person in professional wrestling in the northeastern United States.
Here's promoter Vince McMahon's wrestling lineup for this arena next week.
Vince becomes like that storybook teenager who runs away from an evil stepfather to join the circus.
You know, there's stories of Vince hanging out with Dr. Jerry Graham, who is this very flamboyant, kind of over-the-top figure in pro wrestling, where Vince would ride down the street in his convertible with him while he was lighting cigars, you know, with $100 bills.
But when Vince starts stealing cars for joyrides and getting into fights, Vince Sr. tries sending him away.
Vince went to Fishburne Military Academy. Legend has it that he got into a lot of trouble.
He claimed that he was the only student there to ever have been court-martialed. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but the story goes that he was an unruly kid and that the military school kind of really had their hands full with him.
Until his mom finds him a girl, as Vince explains in this 1999 TV interview.
My mom had said, you know, you have to come meet this beautiful blue-eyed girl. You know, she sings in the choir, and she's pretty, and you're really going to like her.
Let's see, I think I was 13 years old, and Vince was
16.
Dare I say that you were older? Yes, he was 16.
Vince and Linda married on August 26, 1966. After college, Vince goes looking for a job at his dad's Capital Wrestling Corporation. But Vince says his father again turns him away.
He wanted me to have a more secure future. He wanted me to be an accountant or an attorney or something like that, and I really wasn't cut out for any of the above.
He's right. Out on his own, Vince stumbles badly.
He had talked about being a salesman, selling paper cups, things that didn't really thrill him, and not doing very well at it.
Then, for the first of many times, Vince escapes adversity, this time aided by his dad.
They had an announcer named Ray Morgan who was kind of becoming difficult. Vince Sr. hired his son officially as an announcer and also gave him some small towns to promote.
This Monday, a fantastic card of professional wrestling.
Vince, a natural-born huckster, is soon putting those skills to work on all kinds of side hustles.
He was promoting concerts, rock concerts.
And a closed-circuit screening of the infamous bout between Muhammad Ali and Japanese wrestler Antonio Inoki.
Just like I start off fighters, right, fans?
In 1974, Vince even gets a chance to work with Evel Knievel, learning tricks from that decade's biggest self-promoter.
Vince was one of the promoters of the Evel Knievel Snake River Canyon Jump.
Vince pays the Daredevil $250,000 for the closed-circuit rights to the jump. Knievel's attempt fails spectacularly, and so does Vince. The audience willing to pay for the event turns out to be paltry, and Vince loses the entire $250,000. Just a few years later, he and his wife Linda file for bankruptcy. Yet despite his failed ventures away from wrestling, Vince is still convinced that he can expand his father's business.
He really wanted to bring his dad's wrestling company to the next level.
But not as an employee, as the new owner of the company.
I knew there was just some way I had to get my hands on this company.
June 6, 1982. It's sort of a red letter date in wrestling history. Vince sat down with his father and his father's partners.
The deal was for $1 million.
Vince mortgaged everything he had, every dime that he had.
And he bought it on a balloon loan. He describes it as you pay a little right now and then you pay a lot later.
And if he missed payments, then the ownership would revert back to the original group.
They knew Vince knew the business, and if he failed, he failed. You know, they would get their money anyway.
The message was, if you can't handle this, if it turns out you blow it, we're taking it back.
But there may have been an even bigger reason why Vince Sr. was finally willing to pass the reins.
He had pancreatic cancer, and this may have been one of the motivations for him to sell.
Vince Sr. had spent decades as one of the most revered owners in professional wrestling.
The stories that you hear about Vince Sr. don't revolve around ruthlessness or overly competitiveness. Once he had control in the Northeast, he was satisfied to kind of run that territory and do really well with it.
As for Vince Jr., he will not be so easily satisfied.
My dad wouldn't have really sold me the business had he known what I was going to do.
He had a vision to take his father's territory in New York and literally make it the biggest wrestling company, not only in the United States, in the world, to make it global.
Vince Jr. was more willing to take it all and be ruthless.
But first, Vince has to take on his father's old friends, the mostly men running the other wrestling companies across the country.
Every state had a wrestling territory. New York was the WWF. Oh, there was Memphis, there was Georgia, there was Florida, there was Texas.
There was the sense that everybody would respect each other's territory.
And for the most part, promotions all over the US and Canada coexisted, and it was a really thriving industry.
And he thought, why do I have to respect these boundaries? Why can't I just start promoting everywhere?
Because doing so threatens the businesses of Vince Sr.'s fellow wrestling promoters.
You had these promoters now going to Vince Sr., they were his old friends, and saying, you have to talk to your son. He's out of control. Are you aware that he's trying to, run us out of our town? So Vince Sr. approached his son at some point saying, Vinny, you can't do this. And eventually Vince Jr. lost his temper at his dad and said, look, I'm gonna do this with or without you, Dad. I mean, you work for me now. Are you with me or are you against me? Vince Sr. kind of took a moment and thought about it and was quiet, and then looked at his son and said, you know what, Vinny, you're right. Fuck those guys.
And he did, by taking from them the thing they needed most.
The talent, they all went for Vince. Your talent's gone, you can't eat. And that was it.
Now, either you get out of the way or you compete against an elephant.
Vince injects some competition into the industry, paying wrestlers more than they can dream of under the cozy old system. Then he buys time from local TV stations to promote his shows to sell more tickets. That helps generate the cash he needs to begin buying up struggling territories. As his vision of a national wrestling company comes into focus, the master marketer goes looking for someone to inject show business into the wrestling business.
This man is not a television illusion. He is not an artist's conception. He is not a figment of the imagination. He is the Hulk.
Making his first appearance in this arena, ladies and gentlemen, Hulk Hogan.
Vince is looking for the superhero. He's going national, but it's not going to work unless he has this larger-than-life person.
Hogan was the guy to choose. He had the great look.
I mean, to this day, if you ask somebody on the street to name a professional wrestler, they're probably still going to name Hulk Hogan.
Vince made Hogan just a perfect offer that he couldn't turn down.
Vince told him, we're going to put the belt on you. You're going to be our #1 guy.
He came in at the beginning of January 1984, and by the end of the month, he was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion.
History being made tonight. Hulk Hogan, crowned the new WWF Heavyweight Champion.
And really the linchpin to that national expansion. It was Vince and it was Hogan. Neither one of those guys could have done it without the other one.